Anna Weiss received her BA in sociology from the University of Colorado in Boulder and her MA in humanistic psychology from Antioch University, London. From 1973 through 1981, she studied, trained, and worked with C. Maxwell Cade in London and is considered his primary protege and inheritor of his work. Her professional focus has been upon clinical practice, and she has conducted workshops in Taiwan and throughout Europe and the United States, most recently at Esalen. In 1988, she founded the WISE Center in Marin County, where she trains people to access, achieve, and sustain optimal mental states. She'll be showing you how this works with a device called the Mind Mirror, which C. Maxwell Cade invented. Anna Weiss.
Hello, I'm Anna Weiss, and I'm going to be talking about brainwaves and consciousness training. And to talk about that, I want to develop a little bit of common language with you first so we understand what we're referring to in terms of brainwaves and brainwave frequencies. And to talk about that, I want to refer to the Mind Mirror, which is an EEG, electroencephalograph, that was invented by Maxwell Cade back in the 70s. The early original prototype version was invented. I was trained on a prototype of this machine that had magic marker numbers written for the frequencies and a little GSR box that was built in a recipe box. So I come from many years of developing this equipment or watching it being developed. This is the Mind Mirror 2, the second version beyond the first one, which was developed out of the prototype. There is now a Mind Mirror 3 out, and it works with a computer, and I use it at home with my 386, and I didn't feel like trying to lug the big tower and things here. So I'm using this one for our demonstration, but I'll talk about the Mind Mirror 3 a little bit before I'm finished. So what we're measuring here is brainwaves, and when this is hooked up, it will measure the brainwaves in this way. Can everyone sort of see the red lights? We tried to raise this so that you could see the patterns. Brainwaves are essentially measured in two ways. They're measured in frequency, thank you, in frequency and in amplitude. The frequency is the speed of the emission, which is measured in cycles per second or hertz. And if you were up close here, you could see numbers that register the frequency starting at the top at 38 cycles per second, measuring down to 0.75 cycles per second. The amplitude is the amount of power of that frequency measured in microvolts. The further out to the edges these red lights go, the more amplitude there is within that particular frequency that it's measuring. You can see this, these lights here. We're measuring what's called ambient noise in the room. The sockets are at 60 hertz, so the machine is right now picking up 60 hertz through here. Once this is hooked up to someone, and I will do a demonstration of this in a little while, that will be eliminated. So we're measuring frequency and amplitude, and it is the frequency of the brainwave that determines the category of brainwaves. The categories of brainwaves are beta, alpha, theta, and delta. And it is the combination of those categories that determines the state of consciousness or that underlies the state of consciousness that you are in at any given time. We are also measuring the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere on this machine. So it will show you 14 different frequencies in each hemisphere all at the same time. So before we go on with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about those categories of brainwave frequencies. First category that I want to talk about is beta waves. On that machine, they would look something like that. That makes sense to people. All the frequency is out at the top. 38 cycles per second down to about 14 cycles per second is generally considered beta waves. Beta is your normal waking, thinking state. Hopefully a lot of you are producing at least some beta waves right now. Probably a lot of you are producing a lot of other waves too at the same time. But beta waves are what we think with. That's our conscious thought process. And so it's a very important frequency not to be denigrated. It's very important to use it acting out in the outside world. Down below beta waves, we have alpha waves. Alpha waves on this machine come out in the middle frequencies, 14 cycles per second down to 8 cycles per second in there. The border lines of where these categories change are disputable, and that depends on your orientation, your education, and your attitude towards brainwave frequencies. If anyone is specifically interested in that, we can talk about it in a question period later, but those borders are real fuzzy. Alpha waves are a kind of relaxed, detached awareness. They are daydreaming, they're light visualization, light reverie. They are the hypnagogic state you pass through to go into the dream state. It's said in Robert's write-up, which I really appreciated it, in the package that you got at the beginning, that biofeedback was sort of got some bad press in the 70s, and that's really true. I'd like to reiterate that. Back in the 60s and even 70s, it was thought that alpha waves were the end-all and be-all of brain waves, and that they were it. And so there was alpha this and alpha that, and everybody was trying to get into alpha waves. Well, you can produce alpha waves watching TV, so we know that they aren't the end-all and be-all of brain waves. And a lot of you will produce alpha waves as soon as you close your eyes. You'll close your eyes and the alpha waves will come out. I can't guarantee that you'll keep the alpha waves going. There is something connected with the onset of the closed eyes that develops the alpha waves. But it was understood by clinicians and technicians back then that alpha was not what it was being made to be as this state of creativity or meditation. And so therefore, a lot of the emphasis on biofeedback, brainwave biofeedback, was lost and has only really started to reemerge with the more sophisticated understanding of neurotechnology and brainwave frequencies and the combination of brainwave frequencies that I would like to talk about. So that's your alpha waves. Let me not denigrate alpha waves. They're wonderful. They're a very important brainwave frequency. Every brainwave frequency that you're producing is an important brainwave frequency. Each has its role to play in the combination of the whole that you're producing at any given time. Alpha's main function in your state of consciousness is as a bridge between the conscious mind of beta and the subconscious mind of theta. If you do not have alpha, if you're not producing alpha waves, you will not remember your dreams, you will not remember your meditations, you will not remember your deep reveries, and you will not have access to hidden subconscious content, whether it's of a negative psychotherapeutic material or whether it's a subconscious creative inspiration or spiritual insight. You will not have access to it unless you have the bridge of the alpha waves maintained in some way. So alpha waves are very important frequencies. Down below alpha waves, we have theta waves. On this machine, they would come out looking somewhat like that. Theta waves are the subconscious mind. They range generally between 8 cycles per second to 4 cycles per second. They are dreaming sleep. They are the component of the meditation brainwave pattern that provides the depth of experience of meditation. So they are the spiritual connection. They are the peak in the peak experience. They are the aha in the aha experience. They're that oomph that's there. But again, they are not the most important brainwave frequency because alone, producing only theta waves, you won't have any idea of what you're producing. You won't remember what you're producing. You need other brainwaves in combination with your theta to bring back the content of that theta waves. So that's our subconscious long-term memory storehouse, too, is in there. Then down below that we have delta waves. Delta waves are our lowest and slowest waves, down from 4 cycles per second to 0.5 cycles per second. This is a very slow pulsation. This is 1 emission every 2 seconds, compared to your 38 cycles per second up here at the top of beta waves. This slow emission of delta waves is the unconscious mind. It's what's left turned on when the rest of you turns off and goes to sleep. So you go unconscious and you're producing delta waves. However, delta waves are also present for a number of people in a waking state in combination with other brain waves. If you are producing primarily or almost only delta waves, then you would be asleep. But a lot of people produce delta waves in adjunct to other brainwave frequencies. And as such, I like to call them a kind of radar. They are the unconscious mind reaching out in radar in terms of your intuition. So delta is your intuition. It's empathy. Delta waves are present in almost all psi experiences, psychic types of experiences, telepathy, ESP, thought transference, all have delta waves present. Delta waves are also present in a lot of healers when they're practicing their various forms of healing arts. And all of it speaks to basically the mind reaching out with the unconscious radar to intuit and understand and experience on that deepest level what's going on in the outside world. So those are our 4 categories of brainwave frequencies, and it is how these categories combine that create the state of consciousness that you're in at any given time. And I will show right now a couple of these combinations, some generic combinations, and then we'll talk later about some odd combinations and how we work with those. Let's look at the meditation pattern. This is with or without delta. Delta is not essential to a meditation pattern, but essentially the meditation brainwave pattern is alpha and theta. It is the alpha that provides the bridge. So, for example, if you're trying to meditate in here with our theta waves and you don't have the bridge, this material or content that's down held in the theta waves won't get up to the conscious mind when you wake up. Same thing with waking up after sleeping. You know how you have the content of the dream in your mind and you wake up maybe to an alarm clock. You pop awake to an alarm clock and you can feel that dream fragment disappearing and you reach for it and can't quite get it. And what's happening is you wake up, you come up, and the content goes back down again because you are not staying in the state of alpha reverie long enough to allow the content to filter up to your conscious mind. The same with meditation. You need the access of the alpha there to remember the content and the depth of the meditation. Now, the reason that Maxwell Cade invented this machine, he was a remarkable man. He was a yogi, and he was a scientist, and he was very much ahead of his time. And he wanted to know if we could measure the brainwave patterns of higher states of consciousness. So he invented the mind mirror for that purpose. And he carried out all of his research on yogis and swamis and people whose states of consciousness we would in some way emulate. And he found a pattern that kept repeating itself with these people that he measured, regardless of the content of the meditation or the dogma, philosophy, religion, or spiritual doctrine of the person that he was measuring. And he named this pattern the awakened mind pattern. And it's a pattern that looks like this. This is a pattern that he saw continually and repeatedly in people who were considered to have higher states of consciousness. And in this awakened mind pattern, you have both your left and your right hemisphere acting together. You have access to the unconscious radar intuition of the delta waves. the subconscious spiritual connection, creative inspiration of the theta waves, the bridging capacity and the relaxed, detached awareness of the alpha waves, and the ability to consciously process thought all at the same time. And this is a pattern that we have seen repeatedly in people with, quote, higher states of consciousness. Now, interestingly, I was with him in London from 1973 to 1981. And I returned back to this country in 1981 and started bringing this material into the creative arts and the professional worlds instead of just staying within the spiritual realms that he did his original research in. And I have found this pattern repeatedly in peak experience. So it is the pattern also of peak productivity and peak experience. I've seen it in the choreographer at the moment of choreography, and in the composer sitting at the piano doing the composition. And I have seen it in the CEO in the boardroom. I've also acted for a while as a management consultant and worked with some very large corporations, both as in an executive development capacity and in an executive search capacity, doing headhunting with a head machine. Was quite a twist to my spiritual occupation. I had the interesting good fortune to do the retreat once for the YPO club, the Young Presidents Organization. And to be a member of this club, you have to be under 40, the president of your own company, and gross $5 million a year and have 50 employees. So this is a fairly select group of, I must say, men, because they were all men. And I measured 25 of these young, bright executives. And, you know, it was really interesting the number of near-awakened minds there were. Not there, but nearly. The biggest problem that they had was in the beta waves, where the beta waves came out here instead of curving back in. Notice we don't have those higher frequencies beta in the awakened mind pattern. That's your chatter. That's your anxiety that almost everybody is producing almost all of the time. And in a true awakened mind pattern, we do not carry that frequency around with us. There is one more pattern I think I'd like to talk about before we move on to some other things. What happens when the yogi or the swami who lives in this state? Now, there's a lot of us who are aspiring to get into this state, maybe even several times a day when we meditate or when we go into the creative aspect of ourselves. But these yogis and swamis that we measured live in this state. They stay in this state. What happens when they sit down to go into a higher state of consciousness? Where do they go from here? And there is a pattern that we have measured. I haven't seen it that many times. I haven't had the good fortune to, but I've seen it enough times to know that it's there. And it looks like this. And it really is the pattern of unity. There is no differentiation. Now, if you look at our spiritual traditions, in almost all spiritual traditions, there is a basis for evolution or for awakening where the unconscious mind becomes conscious. That's the rebirth. That's the enlightenment that occurs in spiritual traditions. If you can see in this pattern, there is no longer any unconscious. The unconscious is conscious. The content down here in the delta waves has merged with the content throughout the whole of the mind up to the beta waves. So these are the sort of people that go to sleep, but if you were to come into their room while they were sleeping without opening their eyes, they would tell you the next morning what you were wearing and when you came in and what you did in there. Because there is no unconscious mind in these people. Okay, so those are the patterns that we're looking at. Now, what I do, let me talk a little bit about how how I work with this. Essentially, I work with the mind mirror, and I take a brainwave profile of someone who comes into my office, and this profile creates kind of what I call a signature pattern, which is what is your brainwave pattern over a given period of time with a given number of activities that we're doing. And what I do basically is train people to go from where they are in their baseline pattern closer to where they want to be, closer towards this awakened mind state. And I use a large variety of means and techniques for doing this training. My own voice and guided meditation is probably makes up the majority of my practice. I take people into different meditations. But there are specific words, phrases, images, meditations, breathing exercises, eye movements, body positions, all sorts of things that will affect individual frequencies. So what I would do is look at a brainwave pattern and say, what's your key frequency that needs to be affected first? And if we look at the 4 different possible changes that we might do, we might want to learn to reduce. Usually people need to learn to reduce beta. Occasionally not. Occasionally in some of the, I quote, learning disabled children, people that I work with in that state, they need to increase the beta. But generally people are working with reducing beta waves, reducing the, was it the 1,000 monkeys, or the squirming of the worm in the brain, Patanjali called it. It's a terrible description, but it really fits for that anxiety thought that goes on. People need to increase alpha waves and increase theta waves and increase or decrease delta waves. We do have a problem sometimes with some people, some of you might relate to this, oversensitive people who have vast amounts of delta waves are like a radar generator and are therefore picking up other people's thoughts. And this person over here is feeling some pain of some sort, some emotional pain, and all of a sudden our high delta sensitive is feeling upset. And this can explain for a lot of people why they have certain experiences. So a lot of what I do is educating people about themselves and how they operate. Let me show you a couple of more patterns. One that works up, interestingly enough, quite frequently in my practice is the case of the hidden content. I work with consciousness in 2 ways. We can look at consciousness in 2 ways. State of consciousness and content of consciousness. The state of consciousness is this brainwave pattern. The state of consciousness is the state that your mind is in, regardless of the material of the mind. The content of consciousness is the thoughts, feelings, emotions, experience, attitudes, the material of the mind. In a psychotherapeutic way, you can actually watch content being hidden while the mind, in all of its wonderful cunningness, shifts it around so that the client doesn't have to reveal it to himself or to me. So there'll be some patterns that will be a red flag for me that this individual needs to work with content. And that type of pattern might be that they would have a pattern similar to this. The amount of beta waves I'm not going to talk about. That would mean something, but I won't go into it. They'd go from that pattern, when I try to develop theta here, into that pattern. In other words, they will do everything possible in their mind to avoid the alpha and the theta there at the same time. Because what would happen if they had the alpha and the theta there at the same time? The bridge would be made and they would know what is there. And so when we're working in trying to retrieve perhaps early memories of abuse, something like that, we need to look at the content and how content gets shoved around between the different frequencies. When we're trying to work with a specific frequency in order to develop an optimum brainwave pattern, it's very, very useful to have a profile and a signature pattern to know what your specific frequencies are that you need. This pattern, for example, is not an awakened mind pattern. Can anyone guess why this is not an awakened mind pattern? That one right there. Actually, I've just pointed to the reason why it's not an awakened mind pattern. It's got what we call a bottleneck. Can you see that there is too much distance between the theta and the alpha? So whatever content is lodged in the theta is still not going to get up, even though the alpha is there. And this might be 12.5 hertz, and this might be 4 hertz. So those are both within our alpha and our theta designated categories of what alpha and theta are. Now, what we would need to do is look at the specific patterns and the way this individual's brain operates to know, is it better to raise their theta frequency or lower their alpha frequency? And that depends on the actions and the way that the specific individual's brainwaves operate, and it also depends on the actions of their beta waves and how they interplay with that, interact with that.
I'm curious if if you can give a simplistic paradigm for what generates these certain frequencies.
Okay, your brain is producing electrical firings all of the time. This is very simplistic. I'm not going to go into the biology of it because we don't have that length of time. They come out in different frequencies. If you were to look at a medical model brainwave thing like that, we're doing cycles per second, and you would measure a second here, and you'd count the number of cycles in that second. This is happening all over the brain at the same time. What we're using here is a spectral analysis. And so rather than the medical model of measuring one set of frequencies under one electrode, which is the dominant frequency, where a lot of the brainwave biofeedback has not worked for consciousness, is that the traditional medical EEGs measure the dominant frequency, and all of the other frequencies that are happening all at once in the brain get left out. And the dominant frequency may be beta, and so you don't know that there is alpha and theta going on there at once. So the medical technology is looking at each individual tree, and this instrument is taking a scan of both hemispheres, sending it through spectral analysis, and looking at the forest. And that's what helps us to understand the state of consciousness. A medical EEG, just looking at that one dominant frequency, can't tell us anything about consciousness, really, because we need to understand how the different frequencies interact. I know I'm moving on, but I'm moving on. Someone might be producing a large amount of alpha waves, and actually, in my practice, I see people who have been, for example, using a light and sound device on an alpha frequency, not using a set program, but just turning it on to alpha because they have a mistaken idea that alpha is what they need. Alpha is a good word. Alpha is supposed to be good for everybody. But the bottom line is they have far too much alpha, and their dominant alpha is overriding their theta and preventing them from going to the depth of meditation that that individual needs. So they come to me for a profile, so they say, how can I use my light and sound device to my best advantage? Turn off the alpha, turn up the theta, turn up 4 frequencies, turn off 7 frequencies, and that person will get more of what they need.
Yes, I noticed that in your discussion here you talked about the 2 hemispheres still always showing them symmetrical. Are there cases where they're not symmetrical?
Absolutely. Yeah, symmetrical, thank you for reminding me of that. Symmetrical is optimum, but there are cases where this is a fairly, not quite that bad. You're always producing something there. But someone may be doing mathematics, producing beta and a little bit of other frequencies, but mostly left hemisphere beta to accomplish the mathematics. However, our standardized views of what takes place in which hemisphere needs a lot of revamping, because a lot of the standardized views of what takes place in each hemisphere is really metaphorical. I had a person do, this is both math examples, but it's a good example because that's your kind of traditional mathematical thought in terms of the left hemisphere being the mathematical hemisphere. One person I measured was doing mathematics only in alpha waves, no beta waves, or no beta waves to speak of. So I asked how he did his math, and he said, he actually turned red. He looked very embarrassed at being found out. He said, well, every number has a color, and orange and green equals 11, you know. People have very individualized methods of cognition, very individualized ways of using their mind. Actually, the most dramatic mathematics was the person who did their math only in theta waves. And I've only seen it once, and it really floored me. I didn't know what to think. And I made them do it on paper so I could see if they were actually doing it and follow them. And again, they were a little embarrassed too. But they said that as a child, when they were learning to do their math, they needed glasses and he couldn't see the blackboard. And no one knew that he needed glasses. So he learned to do his math by reading his teacher's mind. So, there's a lot in the mind. I would like to demonstrate on Alexis, if you would like to come and come up here and let me wire you up while I'm talking. We'll get a show of some brainwaves going. Alexis has volunteered to get wired. While I'm doing this, I'll talk a little bit. I'll try and talk and wire at the same time. I still use electrode gel. I don't have the newfangled dry electrodes with me, so we're going to have to goo you a little bit. There's a lot of different applications for this kind of work. I've already mentioned the corporate executive type of work that I've done. It's interesting to have two EEGs and look at the interrelationship of the brainwave frequencies. And we've done quite a lot of, in England, we did a lot of research with healers. Healing is legal in England. So we had available to us a wide variety of different kinds of healers, and we availed ourselves of that and went to the two federations of healers, the British Federation and the National Federation of Healers. And we found an interesting thing. We found one federation healed in the right hemisphere, and one federation healed in both hemispheres. And I have no idea why the people in the different federations were attracted to each other to join that federation. But they did, and there was this commonality of the people in the different federations. The two federations, since I've left England, have merged into one. So I'd be interested to go back and see what brainwaves they use. But the pattern of healing that we have seen is primarily the awakened mind pattern. It's the pattern that we see the most often in healing. The awakened mind pattern is not a static pattern, and it is not just one pattern. There are many different awakened mind patterns, and in some ways, if I were to take your profile and want to look at what your optimum pattern is, your awakened mind pattern would be specific to you. depending on what your profile is. One of the things that I'm trying to do right now with a computer programmer in California is to develop an algorithm, and I'm writing software to try to do this profile on software so that I don't have to sit there and look at the EEG. So hopefully sometime in the next year or two, there'll be a software program where you can put the EEG on, go through a specific routine, and come out with not only what your profile is, but what the steps are that you need to take to get closer towards your optimum pattern, your specific awakened mind pattern. There are many different forms of those combinations of beta, alpha, theta, and delta. I heard someone out there say the word channeling, and indeed it is interesting to measure channels, and it's very interesting. I was at a conference on the mind and channeling, and there is a specific pattern that I've seen a lot in channeling when I've measured channels. And I was asked to measure a channel, and this person was channeling in pure beta. And I had to change the subject real quick. There are certain, if the ideas are just coming from the beta waves, they are not coming from the depth of the unconscious or the subconscious. There are also a lot of tapes and audio tapes and all sorts of techniques that purport to accomplish particular things, to get you in one hemisphere or the other frequency, or one specific frequency. And there is a machine that exists that can measure whether those tapes are doing what they actually say they're doing. So there's some interesting research that's still yet to be done. What I started talking about before I lost my train of thought was the healing. And the interrelationship between the healer and the patient is one of the very interesting things we measured too. Watching the brainwave patterns of the healer start to transfer as the healer and the healee entrained with each other, and as the patient gradually took on the brainwave patterns of the healer. And this works interestingly in other arenas. Couples therapy is very interesting with two mind mirrors. It's fascinating. I'll do this in just a second. I want to draw one pattern that's real interesting of a couple I was working with. They were arguing. He was arguing. I'm going to put him over here. He was arguing like this. And she was arguing like that. And the more they argued, he would go like that, and she would go like that. And it was fascinating. They would just jab at each other with their brain waves. And the more he sent his beta out, the more she sent her alpha out. And they had no idea why they were missing. And I explained it to them. I showed it to them on the two machines, and they got it. And for a while, they calmed down, and they both got more similar patterns, and they communicated and related to each other. They did, however, buy two mind mirrors rather than one, so I don't quite know what happened to them. But it was an interesting one. The other interrelationship story here that is interesting is interspecies communication. And I've had some interesting experiences with horses and riders in the measurement of brainwaves and the measurement of, oops, you okay there?
Yeah, got it on.
Of horses and their trainers, and also horses in a therapeutic riding center, and how the horses' brainwaves affected autistic children, and how which horse was chosen for which child to ride on would affect the child's brainwaves. And through looking at the brainwave patterns of the child, you could see that actually the old nag that they were putting the most disabled children on was disorganizing their brainwave pattern, while the sharp, smart, aware, young, that they thought dangerous horse was helping the brainwaves of the child to organize. We also saw which direction that we move the horse in is going to affect the brainwaves. So if you go in a clockwise motion, this particular child is going to do something different than in a counterclockwise motion. So in doing this research, we could help find the children the right riding patterns. There's one other story from this particular experience that really is dramatic. There was a teenager with cerebral palsy, and he was very handicapped. He could not communicate verbally, and his body was very twisted. And he was obviously in a lot of emotional and mental pain with this. Yet he volunteered to be an example for this demonstration I was giving to 80 therapists, physical therapists for disabled children. And I went through this whole thing of drawing the awakened mind pattern and explaining what it was all about. And then I wired up this boy, and there he was with a perfect awakened mind pattern. Just perfect. Just glowing. And everybody was stunned. And I said, do you realize that you have the brainwaves that everybody wants? And he said, I know. He knew that he had this inside him. There was not a dry eye in this house. And his mother was totally vindicated. For 17 years, she'd known he was a special child and that he had abilities that were far beyond what he was considered to have. And all of a sudden, his whole life changed because he was validated. And he was then treated in accordance with who he really was inside, rather than what his warped body was showing. So it was really a very dramatic. I'm going to need to get you to move a little closer here. It was a wonderful experience. Okay, we are wiring in Alexis. And I have an attenuator setting here that will alter the sensitivity level. And so what we can see here is her left hemisphere. I'm sorry, you can't. You can see it on the video later. Okay. Left hemisphere and right hemisphere. This is the right over here. We can see her delta waves coming out fairly strong in relationship to the other frequencies. Or they were until I started talking about them. Did you notice that? See the beta coming out then? Okay, why don't you close your eyes for a minute? I know this is, I want to say one thing before we do anything else. This is a demonstration. These are Alexis's brainwaves being demonstrated under very awkward situations. So this is not your brainwaves that they would be if you were sitting in meditation or normally. This is your brainwaves with a couple of hundred people looking at them. As we can see, it alters what we're experiencing. Nevertheless, close your eyes. Now I'm going to freeze that pattern for a minute. You can open your eyes again, and I'll actually show you what you did. See that alpha? Remember I said some people produce alpha as soon as they close their eyes? Alexis is one of them. So we have this immediate access to alpha waves. Now whether that will stay or not, when she sits with eyes closed for a period of time, I don't know, and we'd have to do more experimentation. But you can see how easy the alpha is to access for some people, how it comes out so immediately. And back with the eyes open without the alpha. Why don't you try that again? That's really very good access. That's a little quicker than sound. Do you work with, do you meditate? Uh-huh. I picked a good guinea pig. Okay. Why don't you keep your eyes closed and just do a little meditation if you can in this circumstance. Now, if I'm looking at this pattern in a session at home, I'm going to see that her beta is reducing, and I'm not going to worry about that too much, especially in this situation. Her alpha is excellent. Her alpha may be a little too strong. If this were a session at home, we might need to reduce that a little. It might be overriding the beta. But that is the brainwave I'm the most interested in. And I've frozen that here so that you can see this pattern. That's at 4.5 hertz. That's her theta coming out. Can you see the meditation pattern that she has? And that's with that little bit of beta there. We really have a near awakened mind pattern here. So this is a real nice brainwave pattern. You might want to see that just so you know what you're doing. Whoops. I just froze that. So what I would like to get you to do, you understand what I'm talking about? Can you see the relationship between that and the pictures I've drawn? So that's very nice. Thank you for your, I think your demonstration needs a round of applause. It's a challenging thing to face coming up and showing your brainwaves in front of a lot of people. It really is, yeah.
Would you do some work with her to get her to show more theta? Like, for example, focusing away from what you're seeing in your mind's eye and focusing in on what body states you're aware of? I don't know if you do that.
I do, but I'm looking at the time, and it would take me some time to do it. I mean, I can't say, do this. Well, let's try one thing. We'll try one thing real quick. Robert, how much time do I have? I can keep going all day. 5 or 10 minutes? Okay. Close your eyes again. The question was, can I do something that will affect her brainwaves and help her develop theta? To do that, I would take her on a fairly long relaxation. I didn't get it out, but I work also with the body-mind connection. I work with skin resistance or skin conductance, depending on which perspective you're looking at, and relate the relaxation to the brain waves, and that's a whole other added aspect. And I would start by doing a deep relaxation because theta is most accessible in a relaxed state. But one thing you might do, Alexis, is just start to visualize or imagine the colors of blue and purple. And just surround yourself in blue and purple. Okay, could you see the impulses coming? And that would take a little time, and I would weave it into quite an intricate guided fantasy if I were to be trying to shape her brainwave pattern. One thing I do would be to be in this situation, look at the feedback. And this is called biomonitoring. It's not called biofeedback because she's not getting the feedback right now. I am. I'm monitoring her brainwaves. And I would change what I tell her to do in accordance with what I am seeing, like that the introduction of the purple, which it does affect theta brainwaves. And through that, I would gradually shape the brainwave pattern to where we think we can get to or where we want to be at that time, and then give her the feedback. And then say, this is it. What you're experiencing right now is where you want to be. So it combines biofeedback with biomonitoring. It's an interesting question. I'm going to lump that in with another couple of categories of questions and answer the whole thing, which might answer some other questions. How does food affect it? How does anger affect it? How does love affect it? how does sex affect it, etc., etc. Everybody is affected by those things in their own individual way. And so if you were used to food, food might calm you down and give you a pleasant sense of relaxation and stimulate your alpha waves. It might make you lethargic and put you to sleep. It might give you energy and stimulate beta waves. So it depends on the individual. I really avoid as much as possible the generics, because although I have created generics, and I will be coming out with a list of generics at some point, individual workings of your own brain waves are very important. And what's important is if it affects you once this way, it's going to affect you again this way. So people say, should I come to a session and not drink any coffee? Well, do you normally drink coffee? If you normally drink coffee, don't not drink it before you come, because then you won't have your normal brain waves. If you normally don't drink coffee, certainly don't drink it before you come. So we want to have your normal brainwave pattern so that we can see what it is and affect it and gradually train it into a better brainwave pattern. We have a memory capability was the question. The MindMirror 3 that we have has a recording capacity of half an hour, and it will record into the machine what the brainwave patterns are and then play that back to you for the half hour so that you can do a half-hour meditation by yourself and then look at the pattern. There's also an event marker here where you can, on this one, where you can turn a light on and you'll know where that event occurred. The MindMirror 3 is quite different from the MindMirror 2. Let me mention that. It does not have these pretty flashing red lights. It's a small, lightweight, personalized unit that uses liquid crystal as its feedback, and it really is good for one or two people looking at it, not a demonstration situation. But it has computer capability so that you can hook it up to your computer and see the patterns on the computer and store the patterns and play the patterns back on the computer. So it's a different version. It's now digital instead of analog, and this is still analog with a digital capacity.
Yes, I'd like to ask you, is this used from you're working with someone, they're not seeing what's happening, you're interpreting the results, or can it be used as in some cultures that have eyes open meditation?
Oh, yeah.
Can you take this into like a semi-darkened environment and directly work with it as a biofeedback tool and watch everything that's going on?
Yes, absolutely. You can work with it as biofeedback, especially if you're wanting to do open-eyed training.
Yes.
Yeah. Or it has another form of semi-biofeedback is the freeze button, so that you can even close your eyes, just push the button with your thumb, and then open your eyes and look at the pattern that you had. So you don't even have to have your eyes closed with it. Yeah, it can be used as a personalized unit also.
Can this be done with your 3 unit, the very somebody else needs?
Yes. Yes, it can. One more, well, I'm going to have to finish. One more little story that you made me think of with the groups of people and training. I was demonstrating this and teaching actually in a Taoist temple in Taiwan. And that was a very challenging situation because the audience was not this receptive, wonderful, aware audience of technology. It was a very rigid spiritual format. And they were very resistant to technology and resistant to my machine, and I was a woman. And that was probably what they were most resistant to, I'm not sure. But again, I did the talk and showed the awakened mind pattern, and there was so much resistance. There was a lot of disagreement with me being in their temple in front of their spiritual territory. And then I asked for a volunteer to be hooked up. And the teacher volunteered, which I thought was right there, showed who he was and his character and ability. And I wired him up, and there was this beautiful, brilliant awakened mind pattern. And all of the students broke out in grins. And the machine worked. They used their teacher to validate the machine rather than the machine to validate the teacher, which we do in our society. And I think with that, I'm going to need to end. And so I'd like to thank Robert for hosting this conference. I think it's a wonderful thing that he's done to bring us all here together. And thank you for coming.
Thank you. Whenever I speak with Anna,